right there. To me anyway, and it's not exactly the way it is, but to me, I kind of visualize the evolution of birds and mammals as being two variants of what reptiles did. So in other words, if I was going to draw a family bush or tree, whatever you want to call it, I would kind of say, here, thank you. I always do that and forget to pick a color. Wait, hold on. There we go. So I would think about the reptilian lineage is moving along and evolving and so on and so forth. Remember, like cladogenesis, where it branches? To me, in my head, and again, this is an oversimplification, but it's not wrong. It's just, missing quite a bit of the detail. To me, what happens from the reptilian is we get this split off of each of those. And those become the birds over here and the mammals. So I kind of like to think about us and the birds in a very bizarre sort of way as being two reptilian experiments, two things that reptiles did as they begin to dominate or as they begin to move out on the land. Because remember, the birds and the mammals, even though that we didn't really, us birds and mammals, especially us mammals, didn't have the place to ourself, if you will, rise to dominance until after the dinosaurs were gone. And the same with the birds. Birds and mammals were around during the dinosaurs, as you'll see today. Bird-like things, mammal-like things, and even true birds and true mammals. So it wasn't like they had to be gone before these organisms could come about. So that's kind of the way I look at that. So I always find it interesting to look at some of the remarkable parallels between what birds and mammals did. I do want to go back for a second because something did not register right with me the other day when I was showing you this slide in class, and when I looked at it again, the reason why is it's labeled wrong. Okay, I never noticed this, but the amnion, what is pointing to in the amnion, that's not the amnion. The amnion is that blue tissue there, that blue structure, and then the amniotic fluid is not in where the, what is that, red or pink? This is the amniotic fluid. I noticed in your book it's wrong too, so. Okay, because the chorion, that's what threw me off. It looked like the amnion and the chorion were the same thing. I'm like, well, no, that's not right. The chorion is that outer membrane, because the chorion, remember I said what'll happen is as the embryo grows, this can actually push up against the membrane or against the inside of the egg, and gas exchange can occur across that. Even that egg doesn't look like it's penetrable to gas as it is. So make note of that in your book or in your notes, as far as the labeling of those two things. All right, and another thing I noticed the other day when I started my afternoon class is I left out a really cool group of critters to talk about with you all. I don't know why. I guess because I was thinking more about birds, and this kind of makes sense, but I didn't talk to you guys about the crocodilian. So let me go back to that before we actually get into the bird-like, reptile-like birds, bird-like reptiles, however you want to say it. But where are my crocodilians? So we did these guys, the lizards and the snakes and all that cool stuff. There we go, the crocodilians. So I didn't cover this in class. So only about 23 species or so of crocodilians, and there are things called, like if you see at the bottom, gabbles, garrels, caimans. The thing in the middle is a caiman, really long snout. We're used to this guy. That's a juvenile. And this is a little bit bigger animal. I got that picture out in the McIver River. I got that picture because I wanted to show you this part here about them being carnivorous reptiles, stealth predators. They're really good at being stealth predators. The reason why, now he's a little bit high out of the water. He's not stalking anything. He's actually probably laying on that bank and warming himself. But you all know the look. Some of you had pictures in your field notebooks. You're looking across a lake, and you see these 2 or 3, depending on how well you can make it out, little bumps. And you know what that is. That's their nostrils and their eyes that are just sticking right above the water, right? And that whole big reptilian strong body is just hanging below. And what they'll do for animals that come down to the edge of the river to get a drink is they'll do that just offshore, So they've got these eyes, and if just like that, those poor folks found out at Disney, especially during dawn and dusk when the light is not quite right and stuff, you can if you were a gator, you could hang right up there on the shoreline. So of course, being a stealth carnivorous predator, once you get your prey and stalk it, being able to hold on and have an incredibly strong mouth, and of course very sharp teeth to facilitate all of that, right? Look at the size of this monster over here. I think this is a Filipino That's a crocodile, actually. We only have 2 species of alligators in the world. One we have here in the United States that was originally described from the Mississippi River region, which is where the name comes from. Yeah, that's a saltwater croc. And then there's another species in China. And usually biologists or ecologists, whenever we see 2 members of the same genus so far away from one another, like they're in the United States and China now, we usually think what it was or what it indicates is the alligators probably had a much wider spread at one time all over the world. And what they've done is they've died out in between. It's kind of the same thing with the Florida panther and the western cougar. Out in the western part of the United States, the western cougar and the Florida panther here in Florida, essentially the same organism, same species, might be a different subspecies. But the reason why is that those cougars or panthers, there's no real taxonomic significance to that, were spread throughout the entire area, just kind of died in between, leaving us in Florida and out there on the West Coast. As I said, they're typically nocturnal. Now, maybe, like I said, why I may have forgotten crocodilians, because my mind was on birds, because crocodilians, even though they look more like, you could say lizards or anything like that, they're really more like birds. They're a lot more like birds. For example, they take care of their young. There is some maternal care. And they have a 4-chambered heart. Remember, up to this point, the reptilians had a 3-chambered heart, where you get that mixing of blood that occurs. And while that's not great, that's not optimal. It is optimal for them. You know, if you got a low metabolic rate, you might be able to deal with that. If you got a much higher metabolic rate because you're flying, or you're warm-blooded like we are, then that heart is too inefficient for you, right? Remember what I said, again, about evolution that I've said a million times, I'm sure. You don't have to make the perfect gritter. Just have to make the gritter that does really good right now. Now, of course, one of the things we worry about here in Florida, other than gators that can crawl over 4-foot chain link fences, so yes, they can climb fences. From a biologist point of view, is when we open up alligator hunts, we worry that folks who are hunting alligators, and luckily most of those guys know what they're doing, or most of those folks, there's probably a few women that do it as well, know the difference between an alligator and a crocodile. We do have crocodiles here in Florida, mostly South Florida. I don't know if I've ever heard of any this far up, but the way you tell a croc from an alligator is kind of counterintuitive to me. Alligator, which starts with an A, and crocodile, which starts with a C, and then I reverse that. Crocodiles have a more pointed snout, and alligators have a broader snout. So it's kind of opposite of the letter. Sometimes I have to remember things in reverse. Or if you look up above, when an alligator and a croc close their mouth, you can see their teeth, but in a croc, if you're close enough, you can see the lower teeth. And see, if you look at the croc down below, that picture at the bottom, you can see from up above it's very significant. I've never seen a crocodile in Florida, although I know down in the Keys they exist down there too. Okay, so any questions about crocs, about the last of the, well, no, I guess the first of the bird-like reptiles, because like I said, they are more like birds than reptiles. Now, in amongst this group we're going to go into next is all the dinosaurs, and I don't have time to talk about all the dinosaurs. You know, for one thing, they're extinct, and we don't really get into talking about too much about extinct species other than those that are making the links between, you know, species around today. But you might remember from your years ago, if you were into dinosaurs and stuff, that there were 2 types of dinosaurs. There were those that were called the Ornithian and the Saurischian dinosaurs. And amongst those dinosaurs, a group of dinosaurs known as the Saurischian dinosaurs had a very unique pelvic structure, and also had a relatively unique upper leg structure. And that's where the birds came out of. They came out of these dinosaurs who were experimenting with not being a tetrapod, which being bipedal, was standing up on their hind legs. Now, we talked about some of the benefits of being able to do that, right? You can see further, you can see prey, you can see predators. But what it does, like in the Tyrannosaurus, remember, it gives them useless front legs. Well, we're going to see there's a group of critters out there that found something to do with those relatively what you might want to call useless front legs, okay? So you see, this is where I'm really stretching the idea of birds and mammals being alternatives of reptiles, because reptiles start down here, and mammals, we split off really early. And the birds don't come to much later. But to me, in kind of a general sense, that's kind of the way I look at it. So, and of course, the plesiosaurs and the ichthyosaurs, those are also two extinct dinosaur groups. Those were the aquatic versions. All right, so let's take a look at birds, man. Birds are incredible. So here we go. 10,000 species. If you're a bird watcher, holy cow, man, you got lots of things in Florida. This is a great place to live. We live in a freeway of birds that move between them, that migrate throughout the year. Flying down the peninsula of Florida gives you a chance, if you get tired, if you need to land on land versus going out over water. So you can use that little peninsula of Florida to give you sort of a, then you fly island to island in the Caribbean, although some make it the whole way. The ones that amaze me are the ones that fly over the top of, oh yeah? All 23? Probably. I haven't been to that in years. The Serpentarium in Kissimmee is kind of cool too, but it's mostly snakes as well. It's always amazing to me when you ever go to Serpentariums and the guys that are working there, or the folk working there, inevitably, if you give a talk, look at them and see if I can do it with my fingers here. One's always missing a bit of a finger because, they've been bit in the past. I've never known a Serpentarium guy who wasn't missing a chunk of a finger. Okay, birds, yes, but reptiles, right? Amniotic eggs, scales on the legs, right? Take a look at that. That's a turkey or chicken, right? Those are scales. No tail or teeth, though. So we have that idea that there are reptilian characteristics, but modifications of that. And of course, the scales can become lots of things. And one of the things that scales can become are feathers. Now, scales come from things called placoids. Placoids, oh, my glasses are really awful. Here we go. Placode. A placoid is a lump on the skin. Now, when you think about looking at crocodilians and alligators, they have those, we call them scutes on those guys. We call them, those plates that you see on their skin. Those come from placoids. So placoids can give rise to things. And one of the things placoids can give rise to is a feather. You can have a feather placoid. And so if you look in the right in my picture, what you get as a placoid is this lump begins to grow. And down below, you're looking at the lump kind of cross-section. Now, jump over to the left. Imagine that lump eventually grows into, say, a spike-like object, which then begins to branch out, which then begins to have maybe a central core that branches out, all through random genetic changes. You see what's happening here. You're making yourself a feather. Now, also notice, and this is going to become important when we talk about bird evolution, notice how the feather's symmetry is changed between the last three stages. In stage 3 and stage 4, we call those kinds of feathers symmetrical, right? Notice they're symmetrical on both sides of that central vein. That last feather is not, though, isn't it? Or is it? No, I think I just did a double negative, right? That's an asymmetrical feather. Now, it's a law of physics. Symmetrical feathers cannot fly. Only asymmetrical feathers can fly. So feathers, of course, as we talked about early in the semester, didn't start out for flight, right? They started out for warmth. And we talked about that as what we call that an exaptation, right? But this is a very big key to their success. Also, keys to their success was the fact that the feathers, if you notice the way they're structured, if you look at their microstructure, like up above, they have this system of hooks and barbs and barbules by which the little veins hook together. So what that does essentially is as the feather moves down through the air, it causes those little veins to hook together to form a solid surface. And then as the feather comes back again on the upstroke, it allows the air to more easily pass through. So it's less resistance on the way up and then provides resistance on the way down. The feathers have been lightened. We all know that typically you don't give your dog chicken bones to chew on because they are hollow, and that's a lightening. That's the same thing we saw. Remember the insects? The air sacs. Remember I said in flying insects, the trachea, those systems of pipes that go through the body, they'll expand into air sacs, won't they? So they can lighten the load, makes it easier to fly. Now, speaking of, and on the left, the wishbone and that big middle keel bone, whenever you see large, very heavy bones or areas that have large attachment sites, that's why this bone is so broad. The muscle, the breast muscle, right, the meat would attach there. It indicates a very strong muscle. So when we look, for example, in the fossil record, and we look at birds and want to know when did they start flying, when did they have the ability to fly, one of the things we notice is when we start seeing these large, the wishbone and the keel muscle, right? Those, what is going on in many cases is skeletal muscles are fusing together. And even though they're light, it provides this lightweight but rigid structure to anchor these very strong flight muscles. And to fly, folks, it takes some strength, okay? So that's, you know, that's again that little detectiveness that we get out of biology, where they dig up a fossil and go, how did they know this thing could fly? They look at that and they go, all right, because they had these big, see, Mother Nature is very economical. Why make big breast muscles if you don't need them? Now, one of the ways you would need them is to fly. I wanted to point out that when we, this whole idea of feathers and placoids and scoops and hair, because now this is not hair, of course, only mammals have hair, but boy, doesn't it look like it, right? So you can imagine something like this, before it becomes feathers, being viewed as being very much like hair. Now keep that in mind, because when we get into mammals, we think that's kind of what happened with mammals. Again, go back to the reptilian placoid. Some placoid gave rise to hair. So that's what I kind of mean in a very general sense. Birds went this way, their placoids became feathers, and ours became hair. But even in the little chick there, you see it, that looks furry, doesn't it? We all love little chicks. Of course, they grew up to be mean, nasty chickens. Now, before we go on, I want to say something about flight, and I only want to say this because I found it interesting. I was watching a show on TV a while back about the physics of how to sail a sailboat. Not that I know how to sail a sailboat, but I think I can understand the physics. But the way a sailboat works, I'm going to try to draw a sailboat up here on the right, okay, with its mast, especially when they're sailing into the wind, is you tack, right? So you set the sail at an angle. So if the wind is kind of blowing this way, you set the sail at an angle, and you can still tack tack into the wind. Well, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Doggone, I should watch that show again. All right. Basically, what makes a sail go forward is not the wind pushing behind it, but the vacuum created in front of it. Okay, so that's a better way of saying that. Let me get rid of my scribbles here. So if we look at the sail on a sailboat again, okay, and that sail, and say the boat is moving like this, and the wind is pushing this way. That's where I messed up. It's not necessarily the positive pressure in the front or in the back of the sail that's doing it. It's because the wind in the front, the sail causes a vacuum to occur. Mother Nature abhors a vacuum. So a sailboat or anything that uses that negative pressure physics technique moves because it moves into the negative pressure. So birds don't fly because they cause positive pressure below them. See, it's constant. They fly because their wings do exactly what the sail on a sailboat does. It causes reduced air pressure above, and so the bird floats up into that reduced air pressure, up into the vacuum. Remember, nature abhors a vacuum. So birds, like sailboats, take advantage of physics again to fly. Isn't that cool? I didn't know that. Now, I got the attaching thing all messed up again, but you understand what I mean, right? The wind pushing at the back of the sail, that's not what's pushing it. It's the negative air pressure, the reduced air pressure in the front. Same reason that a plane on a wing on an airplane flies. Same way. The air flying going over the bottom of the wing moves faster than the one over the top, so the top creates a negative pressure. The plane floats. I think that's cool. I think it's also cool that birds figured it out, because to me, flight is a very integral thing that people spend years trying to figure out how to do, and yet birds, in spite of we call them bird brains, I always watch at the beach and get fascinated by watch that bird come down and just stall and drop. And stall, I mean stall, you just know exactly how to hold your feathers to rise up over the beach and just at the right height, make sure you stall, because once you stall, you fall and land without, falling too far. You don't want to stall 15 feet above the beach, obviously. One of the things, again, is lightness. So they don't have a urinary bladder, which means, yes, exactly what it sounds like. They're peeing all the time, basically. Females only have one ovary, typically two, right? The humans have two. The fish have two. But Mother Nature has gone with the one ovary, which by the way, is only going to be enlarged during a certain time of the year. Awesome. Now, those gonads for the female are also going to be the same thing in the males. Their gonads are going to enlarge only during the breeding season, which is actually triggered all by the same hormones that causes the gonads to enlarge in the female, and the male also causes the males to sing. So among birds, it's kind of funny. We say they're singing because their pants are getting really tight. Okay, males are singing because the hormones are saying it's time to breed, and so we're going to take that gonad and enlarge it and get it ready. Now, of all the things about birds that allow them to fly, one of the things that does it is the circulatory system. It's a two circuit system, 4-chambered heart, no mixing of blood, just like you see in the picture. The crocodilians, the birds, and us have that kind of system. So it's complete oxygenated blood that goes to the body. No purple, no mixing. You're going to have that for something as metabolically active as flying, folks. Look at the hummingbird down there. The heart rate on the hummingbird is 1260 a minute. What's humming? What's heart rate on a resting heart rate on a human? Average resting heart rate on a human. Does anybody know? Have you ever taken your own heart rate? Yeah, it's about right. If your heart rate's doing 1260 a minute, you're dead. You're gonna blow your aorta out. There's no way. But these little hummingbirds, and remember, they can hover in flight, so they're moving those wings incredibly fast to be able to do that. All right, so the 4-chambered heart helps do that. The higher body temperature helps do that. Higher body temperature, higher metabolic rate, right? They're endothermic, like you and I. That's another route where, I don't know, in a very general sense, it's convergent, okay, but we kind of took the same alternative route. They developed feathers and got warm-blooded. We developed hair and got warm-blooded. Now, guess what? Feathers and hair are both good at doing one thing. Before feathers were good for flying, both of them were good for keeping you warm. Okay, so birds just kind of took the next step. We kind of stuck with feathers or hairs keeping you warm, and we modify it for, colors and all that sort of stuff too. All right, now I got to talk about the breathing thing. That's the really cool thing about birds. Birds are very efficient breathers. Okay, now take a look at the little blue jay up above. It's not a very good picture, but you see the trachea. You recognize the lung. Notice they got two other things involved with air. They have something called a front and a rear air sac. Now, an air sac is a lung. All right, it's basically, remember what I've told you? Any highly vascularized surface, moist, highly vascularized, lots of blood vessel surface that's thin enough will, because of diffusion, will allow things to diffuse across. And you don't need to worry about, does oxygen diffuse in or carbon dioxide diffuses out? You let diffusion take care of that. And since your body's making more carbon dioxide through respiration, whenever you inhale a breath of air, there's going to be more carbon dioxide in your blood than there is in the air, and vice versa for oxygen, right? So here's how the birds take advantage of that. Take a look down below at the schematic now. This one down here does a little better job. The thing in the middle that looks like the stacks is the lungs, and then you got the anterior and posterior air sacs, right? So let's go with at the top, inspiration number 1. So the bird breathes in, right? Takes a breath in. Notice the arrows on the front and the posterior air sacs indicating that you have expansion, and what you're also having, okay, and they're focusing in the picture here in the colored in the red, but it's also happening in the anterior air sac too, is you're getting absorption. Those anterior and posterior air sacs are basically like lungs, all right? So you get that absorption of air in that posterior air sac, all right? The bird exhales, expiration number 1. The air in the posterior air sac doesn't leave the bird, goes into the lungs. Now, guess what happens in the lungs? More extraction occurs. It's kind of like the gills with fish. Remember in fish, the blood flows opposite to the water. Now, I didn't get into the physics of that, but the reason why that happens is that it means that you maximize the extraction of oxygen from the water, okay? So this is the same thing. You're maximizing extraction. All right, the bird breathes in again, inspiration number 2. So the inspiration number 2 takes the air to the posterior air sac. We switched over to blue because we're following that first inspiration of air. So the second time the bird breathes in, that air that it breathed in before, that went to the lungs, doesn't leave yet. Now it goes to the anterior air sacs. In the anterior air sacs, more absorption occurs. It's not until the bird expires expiration the second time that first red bolt amount of air is gone, right? Because inspiration 2, Then what's in the blue on the next expiration is going to leave, as you can see in the color. Isn't that neat? So they basically extract oxygen from that one gulp of air 1, 2, 3 times. You and I do once, 3 times. That's awesome. I enjoy running. I enjoy doing long distance and endurance running. I would kill to have a respiratory system like this. Can you imagine? I should. Wonder if I can get plastic surgery and have posterior and anterior air sacs put in. That'd be so neat. Now you know why canaries in a coal mine get screwed, right? Okay, in a coal mine, poisonous gases can accumulate, methane, carbon monoxide, and those can be dangerous to the miners. It can kill the miners. So before they had sophisticated instruments, this guy in the picture, you brought a canary into the coal mine. Why was the canary important? What was his role in all of this? Or why did they do that? Who else came in? Oh, Mark. Hey, how you doing, Mark? Well, yeah, but now why would a bird be better than, say, the coal miner next to him at detecting those poisonous gases? What are you doing today? Anybody else? Nicole or Jennifer? Why would the bird be better at detecting those poisonous gases than, I don't know, say if they brought a cat down there? Or Sydney? And then while you're thinking about that, there you go. Yeah, the gases rise, the bird would absorb more of it. Now that you're thinking about that, what's the name for a species like that? What's a name for a species that usually shows some environmental change first? I used it before when we were talking about another species that you actually were supposed to have in your field notebook. Anybody remember? Yeah, lichen is the organism. And what was the name of those kinds of species? What are they called? They're the ones that are going to indicate there's a problem first. Okay, I don't need to say anymore, right? There you go. All right, bird evolution. Got to talk about it because it's so doggone cool. Birds are what we call beast feet dinosaurs. They're theropod dinosaurs. Theropod dinosaurs are Tyrannosaurus. Tyrannosaurus. That's the image from the American Museum of Natural History. Man, if you ever go to New York, or if you ever go back, or if you've been there, but if you haven't seen the American Museum of Natural History, you have to go. And you have to go to the top floor very first. Go to the very top floor as soon as you walk in and check out the dinosaurs. That's where the dinosaurs are. Absolutely. You walk into the room, you're like, oh my. And these in many cases are the actual fossils. Many times if you go look at fossils, they're reconstructions. They're not really fossils. These are the actual fossils. So these are the fossilized bones of these critters. Now, we all know about Archaeopteryx being the first known bird. We talked about him a lot. There he is. He comes back into the scene. That's when that pileated woodpecker landed on the tree. So I thought, man, looks like Archaeopteryx. Teeth, long tail, feathers, but had theropod forelimbs, right? So those short little forelimbs that we're making fun of the Tyrannosaurus, if you look up above at some of the other critters that had those other theropod dinosaurs, Sinosopteryx, our buddy Velociraptor from the days of Jurassic Park, Caudipteryx, then Archaeopteryx, and then modern birds. And I got some cool pictures down below to show you what these guys look like. Here's Sinosopteryx and Caudipteryx. Velociraptor, you all know, Velociraptor had that big claw. What we're seeing is evolution is monkeying with that front limb, right? The theropod dinosaurs, and I've highlighted it in red for you up above. Short arms, the body's covered with filaments, okay, not feathers, but filaments that might have been used for insulation. Swiveling wrist bones in Velociraptor with that claw, man. Caudipteryx ends up taking those filaments and making feathers, but symmetrical feathers. And then Archaeopteryx, asymmetrical feathers. And with asymmetrical feathers, Archaeopteryx could then fly. Maybe not like a gull, but more like maybe like a chicken. Maybe enough ability to fly up into, say, a limb of a tree to get away from a predator. Doggone good, efficient mechanism that you would think Mother Nature would favor in evolution, right? No doubt. And then we get the birds. All right, now, bird diversity increased during the time the dinosaurs were there, but again, it wasn't until after the dinosaurs were gone when, of course, that pressure was released, and just like the mammals, they really grew in diversity. But like I said, the fossil record is full of lots of toothed birds, which would have made them dinosaur-ish, that had large breastbones. So we know before, it doesn't, it's not like one day Mother Nature says, "Thou shall be birds," right? They're evolving and changing, and you know how all that gray area, I mean, we talked about it in terms of horses and mules. Here you're seeing it, right? We're going toothed birds, that's reptilian, large breastbones, they must be able to fly. So before birds lost their teeth, okay, they were starting to learn how to fly. Now, when they really took off down below, the diversity, when it became exponential, is when something called an alula arrived on the scene. Now, an alula, this is a picture of an alula. There are different feathers in birds. They have primary and secondary flight feathers and all this other kind of stuff. But the alula, the best way for me, I think, to explain it is it's a thumb feather, all right? It's the feather that could be controlled by, if you had a wing, if you could do that with your thumb. Now, what that does, that little tiny feather, that one alula in each wing, it allows birds to maintain controlled, slow flight. The same things that planes use, flaps and slats. Have you ever flown? You know, when the plane's coming in to land, the back end of the wing extends, and even the front end, it makes the wing bigger. Makes the wing bigger to give it more lift because the plane is slowing down. So birds, even their little bird brains, figured this out. No offense to birds, I love birds, but they figured out that all they do is get that one little thumb feather, and now I can do that thing with the gull, and drop onto the ground. And then birds just went crazy from there. Okay? Birds just went crazy. Right here he is again, Archaeopteryx, with his toothed beak, right? And now Archaeopteryx and these more chicken-like, look at the ginkgo. I just noticed that. That's a ginkgo. Oh my gosh. Archaeopteryx and its other chicken-like birds, now they may not have had the alula yet. Let's go back and look and see what we got. Where's Archaeopteryx falling here? Right before that, there's Archaeopteryx. So they might not have had the alula yet. The first alula is in the next species, which I made that thing too small to see, but it really doesn't matter. So these birds, again, could have been jumping chicken-like birds, but they wouldn't need the alula for that controlled slow flight. They do more of a long jumping kind of motion. Everybody knows how chickens move. Okay, there's all kinds of birds, so I'm not going to go through all the orders of birds. I don't have time to do that. Plus, this isn't that type of class. But I did want to point out a few significant ones. The Struthithioniformes, right? What did he just say? The ratites. These are flightless birds, so they don't have that real strong sternal bone, right? They're still pretty good-sized birds. The rhea, the ostrich, and the emu are all examples of this, as is the kiwi in New Zealand. But since they're not flightless, they don't need that, right? Mother Nature is very efficient. If you don't need something, don't make it, okay? These are the most ancient of the birds, and they are also one of those neat little bits of detective work. Do you remember I told you about the lungfish, and the reason that lungfish today are only found in South America, Africa, Australia, and then in Antarctica, fossils are found of them, right? And it was evidence for continental drift. Same thing. South America, the ostrich in Africa, and the emu in Australia are all very similar looking birds. Now, you could argue convergent evolution because they find themselves in similar habitats. But the way you would argue against that is if you could prove, or if you could show that the ancestors of those birds made up, South America, Africa, Australia, if they had this kind of distribution when these continents were together, right? Actually, something like that. Okay? So remember, I said that convergent evolution can be a real pain when we're trying to separate species, but don't always be so quick to jump to convergent evolution that sometimes these animals on distant places look alike because they are distantly related, and it has a lot to do with how the planet continents have drifted since then. See, it's always fun with Mother Nature. Everything gets all mixed together. Oh, the penguins, you got to talk about those. The Spensiciformes. They fly in water, basically. If you ever watch them swimming, it's basically flying. And there's a nice shot of the king penguin. I just remember the penguin exhibit at SeaWorld always smelled so awful because penguins poop a lot. And it was always so heavily ammonia smelled, too. They would occasionally have to rip all the carpeting. I don't know if you've ever been to the exhibit or remember there was all this carpeting, and they would have to rip it all out because they couldn't clean it anymore. Okay, now in the mid-Cretaceous, a group of birds began to evolve and became the largest group, the most dominant group, and today make up well over half, about 60% of the species today. And they're the birds. When you see a bird, this is the bird you're probably seeing, especially if it's singing. These are the perching or the songbirds. They're the Passeriformes. That's the biggest order of birds out there. Now the songbirds, because they sing. Not all birds sing. Rheas don't sing. They may make some squawking noise, but they don't sing. But the perching part is interesting. Perching birds all share something in common. They share a hallux. There it is in the picture down below. Perching birds all have a rear-facing digit that is the hallux. And if you've ever held a bird in your finger, you know what they do with that hallux, don't you? Right? They wrap those digits 2, 3, and 4 in the front, and they wrap that hallux behind you. That's how they're able to sit on the wires. And they have good balance. Of course, if you fall, right, you got your feathers. You ever notice when you watch birds sitting on a wire, you ever notice how they position themselves? It always seems to be very even. There's few exceptions. Next time you notice a bunch of birds on a wire, look and see. They always seem to have a sense of personal space. I always wanted to do some scientific study on that. Maybe penguins just haven't been flapping hard enough. Maybe that's what it is. Okay, a couple of quick birds. Everybody knows the cardinal on the left, not to be confused with the Roman Catholic cardinal. The laughing gull at the top, which loves to make that laughing noise when you're trying to get some sleep at the beach. The northern mockingbird. Hey, here's something kind of cool. I don't expect you to remember this, but this is the scientific name for the northern mockingbird. A mime. Glottis is, in this context, means throat. So a mime with many throats. Isn't that cool? I love when those scientific names have those kind of really interesting, yeah. All right, this is a blue jay. That's what you're typically going to see of a bird that size that's blue in Florida. This is a bird that you may occasionally see, and be cool if you did. That's a scrub jay. Scrub jays are endemic to Florida, and they are also threatened. So they're protected by the federal government. The biggest reason that scrub jays are in peril, threatened and endangered is in peril, is because of habitat destruction. The kind of communities they like to live in around Lake Sumter and those campuses are the kind of communities that are heavily developed. And so the scrub jays take the brunt. Red-shouldered hawks, I have one of those who lives in my backyard. Neat guy, he's been there for years. I assume he's male, maybe he's female, I haven't really checked. These birds you see around a lot, especially in the parking lots of Publix and things, they are the same species. They're both boat-tailed grackles, but the female is the brownish one. And the male is this one. Red-tailed hawks. How do you tell them apart? Red tails. Oh, this is the Toronto blue jays. Those aren't birds at all. And of course, I couldn't leave talking about the birds until I mentioned the dodo. We call a term for, not particularly polite, but a term for someone who maybe you didn't think was very quick. What you might call them a dodo. And the reason where that came from is these birds, these dodos, these big, monstrous chicken-like birds with very small, obviously non-flightless wings, used to live on the island of Mauritius. I went to Mauritius when I was in the Navy. It's a really beautiful, beautiful place. It's east of Madagascar. It's a small little island out in the Indian Ocean. It's very popular. as a tourist place. There were no dodos there because you can see the dodos died all went extinct in 1681. Now, the year 1598, that's when the Europeans arrived on the island of Mauritius. Dodos had no fear of humans. They were big, very easy to capture, good eating, provided lots of meat, and so they would walk right up to the Europeans, and the Europeans cut their heads off and eat them. And in less than 100 years, they all went extinct because we ate them all. Doesn't take long for extinction to occur. Think about how many millions of years the dodo evolved, right? The millions of years in dodo evolutionary history gone in, what, less than 100. Okay, let's get on to the mammals, our last group. Any questions? One of the things I want you to know about the mammals is how the skull changed, right? Synapsid skulls. So now we have that, you know, the diapsid skulls were the ones with the 2 holes, the very lightning. The synapsid skulls were the ones with the 1 hole. So we're doing skull modification. We're going to do some more when we talk about the mammals too. And again, this goes back to what I was saying about this split. Like, here's the birds and the crocodilians over here, and here's us mammals. Along the way, we're all synapsids. All mammals are synapsid, that special skull type, but not all synapsids are mammals. So we have these things called the non-mammalian synapsids. See, remember the therapsids I talked about the other day? These are reptile-like mammals. And of course, as the further we go along, then we get more mammal-like reptiles. You see what I mean? So this would be, you know, could be gradual evolution. It could be cladogenesis too. I don't know what the time frame is here, but we see this what looks like a graduation from reptilian synapsids into mammalian synapsids. And we end up today with 3 groups of them. We have the monotremes, really weird group. The marsupials, we have one of those here in North America. The opossum is a marsupial, and then of course there's the rest of us. Now, the mammals are a very specialized group. That's why there's not very many species of them, about 5,000. Most of those are rats and bats and little tiny ones, little shrews and moles. But the big thing about mammals, of course, is the fact that they all have hair. These keratin-rich filaments, which, as I pointed out, may have come from reptilian placoids, right? From those same things that gave rise to feathers. Remember in the little baby chick? That could have gave rise to Cooper's little furry all around his face there. Of course, now the functions of hair, insulation we talked about. Ooh, I love this. Check that out. Camouflage. Isn't that cool? You know, that's up pretty close. Did you ever read that story about the guy who was out there fishing with the Indian fellow out with his 2 children, his daughter and his son, and they pulled the boat up next to the weeds, and the tiger took out and grabbed the father and dragged him off in the bush. That was the last they saw him. Can you imagine? Honey, where's your father? Oh, well, the tiger ate him, Ma. Yeah, they could sneak up. Cooper, like a lot of other critters, including killer whales, use whiskers to sense where they are, right? We all know the old adage and how true it is that cats usually won't enter a place that's any smaller than their whiskers will allow them. The small little rostral hairs that are found on killer whales when they're first born, or rostral, the nose hairs, they fall out. Hair is not very hydrodynamic, but they're used so the female, or the calf can kind of sense where it is in terms of the mother. And of course, one of the other big characteristics, as you see in the picture there, is mammary glands, right? Oh, hair can be used for defense too. Mr. Porcupine will tell you that. They cannot throw their quills, by the way, unlike what they show you in the cartoons. We're endothermic, a 4-chambered heart. We're thoracic breathers with a diaphragm. So we're not double breathers like the birds are, but we are thoracic breathers. So that does a better job of being, you remember in the amphibians, they're the buccal breathers. And relative to the rest of other vertebrates, we have the largest brain, so presumably we're smarter. I said presumably. These are baby harp seals. In the environment in which baby harp seals are found, it's very important to wean quickly. It's very important to get going on your own fast. You notice they wean in about 12 days. Pups gain about, what's that, about 5 pounds, 2.5 kilos. The milk from mom is basically like drinking butter. So this guy's got a little less than 2 weeks to go from depending on mom to being on his own. So mom is going to just pump him full of fat. Have you covered everything on that page? Yeah. The placental interface. All right. So now in mammals, we have internal fertilization, for the most, not all mammals, but for most mammals. And in placental mammals, we have the placental interface, which is basically, again, like the egg. There's the yolk sac. We have an amnion. We have a chorion. They don't show the allantois because the chorion and the allantois in mammals fuses and becomes part of the placenta. And of course, there's the placenta. And that's where the interface comes from, the nutrition and the waste and all that is taken care of by mammalian mothers. Now, that increases the chances the young will survive, and that protects the young from the environment, right? So once again, we see what we've been talking about all along. If you're going to make fewer offspring, then you're going to put more care or you're going to put more time into them, right? More time into it. All right. Ooh, let's go on about mammals. There's so many cool things to talk about them. All right, mammals have specialized dentition, specialized teeth based on what we do. So if you're a dog, you might have the ones in the front that chisel and the canines for grabbing. Canines are good for grabbing. That's what they do. They grab prey. That's why you'll see, like when a lion takes down the gazelle or the wildebeest in Africa, they grab them on the throat, don't they? Right there. And what they do is they take their canines in the bottom and the top and they sink them through and they basically collapse that animal's trachea and they suffocate it to death. Life, it's probably not pleasant, but that's the way it is when you're out there in the dog-eat-dog world. Deer have no use for that, so their teeth are just grinders. Beavers are grinders, but they do have a use for their front teeth, not so much in eating, but to make their log dams. Beavers are cool, really weird, cryptic critters. You'll rarely ever see a beaver. I've seen evidence of beavers in the woods several times, but I've never actually seen a beaver. Elephants kind of did the same thing, but their incisors or their chisels have become their tusks, right? And they use those for battle and all that sort of stuff. Humans, we have a mixture, as we all well know, right? We have our incisors in the front, and we have our canines and our premolars and our molars. So there's variation, not in all cases. For example, killer whales have all the same type of teeth. They're all homodont, conical-shaped teeth. And that's because killer whales don't chew their food. They grab, just like the shark, right? Grab and swallow it, basically, whole. Hooves, horns, and antlers. All right, hooves, like this horse hoof. Those are pads of keratin, same thing that makes up your fingernail. Now, if you want to see what you're looking at on the horse versus you, look at the end of your finger. Maybe you have to turn it upside down. This would be your nail, the hoof, and this right here, what you call the frog, horse people call that the frog, that's the end of your finger. So imagine that the end of your finger, the nail grew very thick and grew around the finger. That's a horse's hoof. Organisms can either have horns or bones. Bones horns are antlers. They're both made of bone. But one's surrounded by keratin and the other one is not, and the other one is replaced, right? Antlers are replaced. You've seen them. The velvet that grows on the bone, that helps grow the bone, and then each year, those antlers are discarded. I know you guys have seen things like that before. And that's the difference between an antler and a horn. Horns are not discarded. Some of these cool little creatures can fly. The only mammals that can fly. Now, sugar gliders and flying squirrels can glide. They can't maintain sustained flight. That's what we mean by that. And the reason why they can do that is this cool little membrane between the, remember I told you, these are the finger bones. I showed you that specimen in class. And that's just a membranous tissue called a patagium that they form between. That's their wing, basically. This is a Florida species, Brazilian freetail. Actually, one of you had it in your field notebook. Not in this class, but I think in the other class. There's the freetail part of it. I see bats flying around in my house at night very often. If you're watching, you see like at dawn and dusk, you see something moves. It doesn't move exactly like a bird. So I actually got paid at UCF when I was a graduate student there to round up bats. They had a problem with bats that were living in the the education building. They were living in the walls, and the education building had a big gym in it, and they would hold graduation in the gyms when UCF was small, and the bats would come out and swoop down across the people during graduation, freaking everybody out. So they actually paid me to go collect bats. So I would go over there when they'd find a bat, and I would wait till it, that's right, Jennifer, you did. I would go over there when the bats would light up on the wall, then I would go catch them, and I put them in an old bait bucket that I had, and I would take them outside and turn them loose. And then, of course, what they do is fly back in the building. And since they were paying me $100 a bat, I figured, man, I got the thing here. As long as I let these bats out, they'll make their way back into the building. They eventually hired some guy who built these devices that let the bats go out but not go back in, like a one-way valve. But unfortunately, he did it during breeding season and left all the young bats inside, then died. And you can imagine what the mess that made. Helps to know something about the life history of your animals, doesn't it, if you're going to be somebody, an expert in getting rid of the nuisance ones. They even had an article in the newspaper about me, the Batman, rounding up bats. All right, mammalian evolution. As we talked before, there are synapsids. There are synapsids that were reptiles, and there are synapsids that are mammals. Now, the reptilian ones have gone extinct. Reptiles haven't gone extinct, but the synapsid reptiles, like this little guy here, and what's that? I was trying to say that earlier. Biomorsuchus. This is a really cool one. I like this one. This looks like a cartoon animal, doesn't it? Cristerognathus. That's another synapsid. Now that's a synapsid mammal, and then Biomorsuchus is a synapsid reptile. Okay. As I said, during the dinosaur era, mammals were evolving. Okay, 200 million years ago. The dinosaurs didn't die off for another 140 or so million years. So for 140 million years, mammals and reptiles lived together. All three groups, the monotremes, the marsupials, and the placental mammals, all arose at least by the early part of the Cretaceous. So again, another 70 million years living with the dinosaurs went extinct. And of course, after they went extinct, right, that pressure was lifted and adaptive radiation could occur. Remember adaptive radiation, that stuff that happens on islands? It can happen when an environmental pressure is lifted. The dinosaurs are gone, and the mammals just went, woo, and they started going crazy in all these environments. Now, most of the time, as we all know, those stories were not success stories, but sometimes there were. Like sometimes one of the ways that mammals learned to live, especially during the time of the dinosaurs, was these little tiny shrew-like critters, like this guy living up here in a tree. They were insectivores, and they spent their time up in the trees because that was safer than running around on the ground where the dinosaurs were. And if they did come out, or if they did go on the ground, they tended to be nocturnal. Now, how do we know that again? That's another piece of detective work, large eye sockets. If we look at the fossils of these insectivorous shrew-like mammals, and they have large eye sockets, they had large eyes. Right? Same thing they do with fish. A large-eyed fish would indicate a fish that probably lives deep in the water. This is cool. Mammals evolved. Now reptiles can hear. I mean, insects can hear, but mammals have a much better sense of hearing. And the reason why there is they took the reptilian jaw. Now, up above in this picture, this is the reptilian jaw. You remember the reptilian jaw? Remember in snakes, how they can distend and open their jaws? In the reptilian jaw, there's actually a couple of other bones in the joint compared to ours. Now, they're colored here, and you see the names on the right. Don't get too hung up in the names. If you're taking A&P, you might have to remember those. But you notice, for example, we have a squamosal bone, we have a dentary bone, we have a quadrate, and the articular. Focus on the articular and the quadrate mostly. Those little bones in the reptile are part of the joint of the reptile's jaw. Now, this is an extant reptile. These are reptiles that are around today. These aren't reptiles that went extinct. These are basically present-day reptiles. See down below, present-day reptiles don't have those three little, remember we learned them in school, the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, actually called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. All they've got is the stapes. All they've got is the stirrup. So they got an eardrum that bounces this one little bone against the inner ear, and they can hear sound. Now, we can hear sound much more detailed because of those three little bones. Where the malleus and the incus, the hammer and the anvil, came from, you can see in the picture, right? They came from the articular and the quadrate. So they were originally jaw joint bones, and they migrated, moved, and modified and became these inner ear bones so that mammals hear better than reptiles do. So your hammer and your anvil used to be part of your jaw. One of those neat little tidbits, I think. Really cool stuff. Oh, gosh, we could talk about mammals for days. Let's see, mammal groups. All right, three big groups. The three big groups I've been mentioning. The monotremes. I dare say none of you. I know you ever seen one in a zoo? I might have as a kid. Monotremes, the marsupials, and then what we call the eutherians, or the monotremes, the pouched, and then the placental mammals. You have to, obviously, we're in the last group. The monotremes are the most ancestral. They're oviparous, you see. You see, they're really weird. This is, again, critters like this, they're found in Australia, the land that time forgot. This right here, I don't know what kind of coin that is, but it doesn't look any much bigger than a dime. Looks like little jelly beans. Those are platypus eggs. Okay, so these things, can you imagine the first Europeans coming to Australia? So you go across this platypus, and it's like, it's a duck, it's a beaver, it lays eggs. And it's also not very nice, by the way. They have venomous spines. They're actually pretty nasty critters. They also have a cloaca, by the way. So they have this reptilian thing. Remember that opening for the digestive, the urinary, the reproductive systems like we found in the shark? Fish, amphibians, reptiles, this guy's got a cloaca. You don't have a cloaca. They have no well-developed nipples. See the young in the picture there? Basically, what they do is it's an area that secretes milk. It's not really a nipple, and the young just kind of lick the milk off of that. Okay, now the echidna, this isn't an echidna, a spiny anteater over on the right. So I can imagine what the first Europeans must have thought, when, especially the scientists. Well, we know what mammals are, but we thought they didn't lay eggs. Weird critter. The marsupial ones, like I said, we have a marsupial here in North America. The only North American marsupial we have, which unfortunately many times ends up dead on the side of the road, is the opossum. These organisms are viviparous. They give birth to live young, but the placental stage, that mother nutrient being provided, is very short-lived. In other words, the young are born, let's say they're born half-cooked, okay? They're not quite ready yet. They have to continue their development in the pouch, which is where they get, the marsupials get their name. That kangaroo, that pouch with the joey sticking out, the pouch is called a marsupium. Opossums carry their young on their back, but they also have a marsupium on the bottom of the female. She's got flaps in her skin by which the young develop in. And if you look in there, the opossum, the brush-tailed opossum, you can see what they'll do is there is a nipple in there that they can use to nurse upon. All right, so we go from eggs to a half-baked embryo that has to finish development in the pouch, and that means the joey, when it's born, by the way, has got to crawl itself up the fur into the mother's pouch to make it. And then you finally have the placental mammals. And in the placental mammals, we're doing the same thing as the marsupials, just a little bit longer. Okay, so the development, the gestation period allows for a true placenta to form, more fetal development. Parturition, by the way, is a word for birth. So more fetal development prior to birth. And this appeared to be very successful among the mammals, because right after that, we get this rapid diversification. Right after the dinosaurs go extinct, starting even 40 million years before that. So as far as the placentalness of mammals, that seemed to really hit it on the head in terms of mammal diversity. Okay. All right, let's look at some groups of mammals again, or orders of mammals. I'm not going to go through each of them, but I want to point out a few. There's the monotremes that lay eggs, the marsupials that we have, pouches, and that's the kangaroos. The only one we have, again. We used to have a lot more. They went extinct, but the opossum. The elephants, the manatees, right? Aquatic, no hind limbs, so they've lost their hind limbs. They, in fossil record, they have the residuals of those. And by the way, just kind of an interesting fact, manatees are actually more closely related to elephants than the other mammals. They're very elephant-like. If you think about the way they use their mouth to grab the lettuce, have you ever seen them eat? It's very flexible. It's kind of like the trunk on an elephant, isn't it? The aardvarks, which I just love that name. Rock hyraxes. Let's see what else. Oh, the lagomorphs, the rabbits, right? Hind legs longer than the front legs. The rabbits, the hares, the pikas. I've got some pictures of some of these weirder critters I'll show you in a second. The rodents, with their constantly growing in size. These guys are chiselers. Mother Nature saw fit in evolution to make sure that these rodents, that these animals that chisel a lot, have a continuing growth of teeth. So their teeth continually grow. As a matter of fact, they have to chew in order to keep their teeth down to a size so that they can actually feed properly. Of course, along we come with our opposable thumbs, and we think are real fancy, right? Well-developed cerebral cortex. We're all very funny. We eat different things, and we know how to enlist technology, don't we? That's where we are. All right, little around the world kind of thing. The capybara up there is the world's largest rodent. Makes it the world's largest rat. Rats are all over the world, and that's because they're very good at rafting. They're very good at getting aboard ship. If you've ever been down along the port, you see that the mooring lines that hold the ship to the pier will often have this cone strapped to it. That's to prevent the rats from walking up the mooring line. I had rats on my ship when I was in the Navy. There's not much you can do about it. There's foods, and it's confined. And I recall seeing out in the middle of the ocean, unfortunately, there's these big mats of garbage floating, and coming across one day, looking through the binoculars, and there's something moving on this mat of garbage. And as I got closer, there was a whole bunch of rats. And there were all these, and we were, oh gosh, we used to say the nearest land was 3 miles straight down. We were thousands of miles out to sea, and there were these rats. Now, did most of them make it, or any of them? Probably not. But some of them do. And as I said, they're really good at dealing with those kinds of adverse conditions. And that's why I find rats all over the world, not just the ships, but they're good on their own, rafting from place to place. There's the manatee. Fortunately, they just swim too slow, right? And they hang right below the water. I mean, I've gone out doing dolphin work in a boat, and almost myself, and I look out for them. I come close to hitting them sometimes. Manatees typically don't die from the prop. Years ago, there was a push to put shrouds on people's props to prevent the manatee. Many of them have cuts. Most all of them have cuts from props. But it isn't that usually kills them. It's blunt trauma from being hit by the boat. Breaks a rib, punctures a lung. This is an Australian version of the manatee. It's called a dugong. And then this one is a Steller sea cow, which I only had to draw because they've gone extinct. Back in the 19th century, I believe they went extinct. This is a pika. Like a little rabbit thing. Cool little animal. There's no such rabbit like that, but this when I was a kid, my dad took me to go see a movie called Night of the Lepus. Lepus is the scientific name for rabbits, and these rabbits were the size of wolves and attacking the world and all this stuff. And I remember it gave me nightmares. So my family always teased me about being afraid of rabbits. I'm not afraid of rabbits, but you never know. If they had teeth like that, I'd be afraid of them. Oh, gosh. Oh, gosh. I could do an entire class on the dogs and the wolves. I love canines. Their behavior, their biology, just of the mammals, they got to be easily my favorite mammal. The artiodactyls, or the set artiodactyls, is another name for them. The artiodactyls are a group of organisms that includes not only sheep and pig, but also the whales. And this is new information. Artiodactyls get their name, the footed ones, so I'm obviously not talking about the whales, because they have an even number of toes. You see that deer track right there? Even number of toes, right? Cows have even number of toes. That makes them an artiodactyl. But again, like if you notice in there, if you see, back, oh gosh, maybe 15, 20 years ago, gosh, it has been that long ago, scientists finally made the connection and said that the closest relatives to cetaceans, we want to know what type of mammals did cetaceans arise out of. You see, cetaceans, whales, and dolphins went back to the ocean. They were out on land as mammals, then went back into the ocean, and we found out it was the artiodactyls, which kind of like I said, it begs the question, if these even-toed ungulates or artiodactyls are closely related to the cetaceans, then that means cows and porpoise are pretty closely related to each other, aren't they? Relatively closely related. So where did the whales and the dolphins and the cetaceans came from? They came from cow, pig, deer-like ancestors, even toad individuals. Now, horses and their other members are what we call odd toed, and they're not artiodactyls, but perissodactyls. I remember the difference again on reverse. I remember a pair is two, and then I remember it's the opposite. So perissodactyls have an odd number of toes, like a horse, okay? We talked about the bats, the only flying mammal, the only truly flying mammal out there. Again, just because you can glide doesn't mean you can fly. Now, I find bats kind of interesting. I know a lot of folks, there's a lot of misnomer about bats. You know, they'll get in your hair, and I don't know what they do in your hair, but they would get in your hair, so you would always, if you saw bats, you have to cover your hair. And then vampire bats, and there are vampire bats that feed on the blood of organisms, but for the most part, humans don't have to worry about bats. We have 13 species in Florida. That's what these things are if you're ever out in the woods. These little bat houses, which you can build. Bats are good for controlling insects. So if you want to control mosquitoes and stuff, this is one of the better ways to do it. And then there are some big boys. This is the Acerodon jubatus, the giant golden-crowned flying fox from the Philippines. Flying fox, but really a bat. Although it looks like a big dog, especially that one hanging on the right there. Look at that. It looks like just I don't know what it's got in its mouth. I guess it's feeding it something. Banana. But look at the girl holding is that a banana? Imagine you flying around, something like that comes down. Holy cow. That's Batman. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. See, he's hanging by his legs there with the claws. Look at all the vascularization in the patagium there. That's really neat. He's pretty brave holding that bat up. All right, 2 more slides, folks. I don't do a lot on human evolution simply because, oh gosh, you could talk a lot about it. This is the whole subject of an anthropology class, but I do want to point it out in terms of how we fit in with every other critter out there. We are part of a big part of that family tree or bush, and we're not the only humanoids out there. Throughout evolutionary time, there's been quite a few stops and starts along the humanoid line. You can see these have all gone extinct. Here we are today. Neanderthals were one of our last closest humanoid relatives alive. We finished them off not too long ago. There is some new evidence that we might have some other close relatives like Homo naledi. That one right there. Read a little bit about that. That's a new one that's been discovered that might be closer related to us than Neanderthals. We're not sure where that fits in. So you can see, like anything else, the humans have done just like the Galapagos finches, right? Just like every other critter out there, they've expanded out. It just so happens among the human group of the family tree, or the human group of the primate part, it's only been us Homo sapiens that made it through. If you want to get an idea of our closeness of our relationship to chimps and all that, people say, oh, humans evolved from chimps. That's not what that means, obviously. You got to go all the way back down the tree, go back up this route, and go out there. There's the chimps and the bonobos. Now, one of the hominids along the way that's gained some interest and notoriety was Lucy. Okay, Lucy was an Australopithecine. Now, an Australopithecine is not a human. Homo there is what we would call humans, but an Australopithecine is a bipedal primate. Human-like, human-related, but not even, as you can see in this branch, along the line to humans, right? This is Lucy. Lucy was discovered in 1974. She's about 3.2 million years old. This is all they got out of the fossil. They were able to tell it was a female by looking at the pelvic structure. And based upon this, the artist was able to do some reconstruction down below what we thought Lucy looked like. Lucy looked like, a dude that really needs to shave his hair pajamas, right? I mean, a really hairy humanist, but not human quite yet. Interesting thing about Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy, that was her species name. That was the species name of these critters. One of the other things we have is the Laetoli footprints. And the Laetoli footprints, that's really, really so cool. What a find. Are fossilized footprints of Australopithecus walking. And we can tell by the way they're walking that they were bipedal. So we can gain evidence from Lucy on her sex. Obviously, we can carbon date how far along she lived, and we can also gain evidence because we found these fossils around these footprints that at this point already we see organisms along the human part of the lineage already walking up on their hind two legs, right? Now, I've really skipped over the rest of human evolution. It involves an awful lot of changes to physical structure, changes to cranial capacity, cerebral cortex, and all that sort of stuff. But like I said, that's basically the subject of another class. But I want you to appreciate the fact that we all fit in this group together and evolve just like all those other critters have. All right. Well, folks, that's it. Let me stop the recording.